Hey guys, what's up? It's Sean, Autotopia LA. Today we're gonna do a really fun one. I've done this one in the past. We've shot a video similar to this twice before, which deals with why are custom cars so expensive. Every time when we shoot vehicles, be it $50,000 in upgrades or millions of dollars in upgrades, inevitably I see people commenting saying I could have done it for less. How could they spend so much money? So what we're gonna do in this video is we're gonna take a look back at 5 vehicles we've shot in the past. Every single one of these are over $1 million.
$1 million.
There's one of them in here that's a multi-million-dollar build. And I think it'd be fun for you guys to look and actually take into consideration why it is that these cars cost so much money to build. So we're gonna start off with one that I know intimately. I've spent a lot of seat time in this car and I look forward to getting back in it soon. My buddy Chris, who's also a partner in the channel here, Chris owns a car very well known, Vicious Mustang. For any of you that don't know it, dig back into our channel. We got some early videos of that car. But Vicious Mustang starts life as a '65 Mustang. By the way, a coupe, not a fastback. Now let's look at what's original on this car. The 2 A-pillars and the front cowl, a portion of the cowl, are original to this car and the VIN plate. Everything else you see on this is 2015 and newer. So let's start off with the simple element. Let's take the parts, some of the parts that are in this car, and let's just set them on the garage floor for a minute here. Somewhere in the neighborhood of about $250,000 in parts. What? How is that possible, Sean? The transmission alone in this thing, the MCO 6-speed sequential, which is a transmission used in race cars, is about a $45,000 piece of equipment. There's also the controller for it. So now you put a chassis under this car. It's an Art Morrison chassis running an independent rear. I don't even know the cost of that. You know, $30,000, more than that, $40,000. So now we've got, you know, give or take, just shy of 100 grand in parts sitting on our garage floor. Now we want to put power to it, right? So it's an Illuminator engine, 5.2, but fully, completely built. All internals gone through on this car. I mean, forged everything. It's an extraordinary engine build because they knew they were going to put mad amounts of power to it.
I got mad power.
By adding not just a supercharger to get the low-end boost, but also adding twin turbos. That's right, this car is a compound charged car. So now we got the supercharger and we got the twin turbos. Add in whatever cost that adds up to. The wiring harness on this is all aircraft quality wiring. So you got a couple bucks in wiring on this one. We've also got a one-off set of forge line wheels, the Kumo tires, I mean, just like the parts start adding up. So now we got $250,000 in parts sitting on the floor of our garage and we want to build what turns into Vicious Mustang. You've got radical amounts of fabrication hours on this car to chop the coupe, turn it into a fastback, fit the Dynacorn parts, add the radical flares, sharpening the lines. I mean, the amount of work in this car, here's a number just to take into consideration. There's give or take, there's about 10,000 hours in the build of this car. The shop that built this, Timeless Customs, let's play for a minute and say they're $100 an hour, which they're not. I mean, hell, your Honda dealer is gonna cost you more than that, as well as your Ford and GM and all the other dealerships, way more than $100 an hour. Let's throw out a number. Let's say we're $100 an hour building this car, about 10,000 hours, 10,000 times, do the math, we're at about $1 million there.
1 million.
Then there's also the process of once the car's built, they have to be sorted out. Cars are never perfect from the get-go. They're just not. I don't care how good the builder is, I don't care who the builder is. You don't turn the key, go drive the car down the road and now turn it over to the owner because everything's ready to go. There's the sorting out process. Vicious Mustang, over $1 million to build this car, and what you've got in the end is an extraordinary car that does great on the road, street driving, casual freeway cruising, and then we've also had the pleasure of having this on track. I've personally gotten to experience it on track 2 times. First time it caught on fire, luckily I wasn't the one driving the car, and it was very mild and the car was brought back to life quickly. Now let's jump over to my buddy Bob Matranga, one of 2 Bob Matranga cars we're gonna show you today, by the way. Bob built a Tri-5 with the intent of going to Detroit Autorama and winning Riddler. He wanted to take home the trophy. and he had a no expense spared. He wants to win Riddler. Unfortunately, that car, because of politics, didn't win Riddler. Should have won Riddler that year, but it did make the Grade 8. So just making Grade 8 alone is a massive win if you know anything about the Riddler competition. Before they even start building, turning wrenches, cutting anything, this car starts at design. And some of my favorite builds always start at design. As Sean Smith says, rather than sketching in metal, everything's done in renderings and design work before anything happens in the garage. Chris Brown is the designer in-house at Matranga Hot Rods. Knowing the amount of design that went into this car, named Brute Force, you've probably got tens of thousands of dollars before anything happens off of the computer screen. So now you take Chris's designs and you do things like chopping the top of this car. And it's chopped so little, I can't remember the exact number, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, something so minimal that it almost doesn't make sense to do, but it did because of what the design of this car was. Also sloping the front fenders on this. You start dealing with one-off everything. Chris Brown told me that other than the fluids and the tires, every single thing on this car is a one-off. So you got this crazy Merlin motor in here, twin turboed. Car's making somewhere, if I remember correctly, in the range of about 800 horsepower. And then one-off everything, the seats, the wheels, the bow tie emblem worked in everywhere on this car, from the most subtle small pieces all around. Paint and body, you go to mix paint and body. This is not a car that you knock out in a few weeks' time. I mean, you're talking about, I think it was somewhere around a year to get the paint and body done on this, blocking and blocking and blocking. And again, you've got thousands and thousands of hours that go into this car, over 8 years to produce what you see, the finished product being Brute Force. And one of the things I love about Matranga is not only is Bob willing to go to the crazy expense that he does on some of his vehicles, but other than Brute Force, every car that Bob and his son Kent own, they drive them. And by the way, this car, when it's done being shown, will be driven. They're still in the show process with Brute Force, but we're getting close on this. And consider this about that car as far as the show process goes. It makes Grade 8 at Riddler. It goes to Battle of the Builders at SEMA and wins Battle of the Builders. It goes to Grand National Roadster Show and takes awards. Everywhere this car goes, this car picks up awards. Why? Because it's stunning, it's beautiful. The design choices made on this car, the amount of work that went into this, the craftsmanship that took decades to build to where you could get to the point of building a car at this level. It's just astounding to me, and I love the idea that this car will get driven, and when it does, we will be there with our cameras rolling and laughing and having a blast with Bob shooting this car. I can't wait. Now, as far as dollars go, I've heard conflicting amounts on this. Part of it being Bob is just such a humble guy, he would never want to admit the dollar amount. But I've heard numbers like $2 million and $3 million, and there's just not a question here. And if you have a question, again, I ask you to consider the parts that go into this, the time and energy put into it, the shop rate, the design time. It really does add up. You might not like it, and trust me, I'm probably in the same boat as most of you guys, which I can't today, and probably through the remainder of my life, I'm probably not going to get to the point where I can afford to go, hey, let's spend multi-million dollars building a car. But this car, Brute Force, is truly one of the most exceptional cars I've ever seen. Now let's jump into another one here. This is a car we shot very early on in the channel. A car built by Wicked Fabrication up in Washington. It was commissioned by a guy named Bruce Levin. And unfortunately, Bruce isn't with us anymore, but I only heard great things about Bruce Levin. And I only got to meet him one time on FaceTime towards the very, very end of his life. This is a 51 Ford Coupe. Now, a 51 Ford Coupe for me is truly one of the ugliest cars ever made. I know some of you guys are probably just love that car and how dare you say something like that. And that's cool, that's the beauty of design and artistry, right? Is what's beautiful to one is not to the other. Bruce has this idea that what he wants to build is a car that reminds him of what he would have seen in the mid-50s out racing. So they do things like pull a Lincoln engine into play here. They bring a Lincoln 360 and put that in the car. Not a big horsepower car, but then you start dealing with things like chopping and sectioning and channeling and all these approaches to doing metal work to create the look they did with this car. To this day, I put this 51 Ford Coupe up against any car out there and I say it makes top 5 custom builds of all time. Want to fight that one with me? Bring it on. I'll fight you all day long on that because this car is truly extraordinary. I mean, the panel of switches up on the headliner to get it out of the way, the battery cover in the trunk that looks like, I don't even have words to describe other than it looks like jewelry to me. The leather straps on the hood. Again, keeping with the race theme, the 4 spark plugs on the firewall in the car, the Hilborn stacks on top of that Lincoln 360. I mean, they just look stunning to me. The interior, the seats you sit in, the shifter. The shifter is one of the craziest things I've ever seen, where the shifter's back here, but the linkage goes all the way forward to connect down to the transmission. It's artistry. Everything about this car is artwork. And here's a number to consider for you, because I don't even know what they have into parts on this car, but just consider this number. The paint and body alone, now that's including all the blocking, but the paint and body on this car is somewhere in the neighborhood of $130,000. I don't personally own a car that's worth $130,000, and that's paint and body on this thing. Not to mention, again, the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours, year after year after year building this car. It ended up with a final cost of $1.25 million. But I'm not saying it's worth that. Here's the tragedy of that car, in my opinion. I mean, this one crushes me, is that car, after Bruce passed away, he willed it to the builder and the painter, which was just such a cool gift. They're not in the position to keep this car, so they opted to sell the car. That car sold a couple years ago for $300,000. It's a joke. This is the typical of a Resto Mod and Pro Touring car, is you're looking oftentimes at 30 and 50 cents on the dollar of what you spent. This hobby is not one based in value. You want to put value to your cars, you go buy something that has a potential to be collectible or already is collectible. Go buy an F40, spend a couple $1,000,000 or more at this point, and watch that car appreciate over time, and on and on. You guys get the point here, right? There's cars that are investments that make sense financially, and then there's cars that make sense passionately, but not an investment. These aren't smart purchases. All right, so let's jump into a car my friend Steve Strope built for Bob, the owner of ARP, 57 Ranch Wagon. They have this intent with this car to do like an American version of a shooting brake. If you don't know what a shooting brake is, it's something that English royalty would have built so they could go out hunting. And so they would take something like a Ferrari or an Aston Martin, so many different cars, and they would turn it into somewhat of a hatch station wagon thing. And this would be so they could have their guns and their ammo, maybe a bottle of wine and tea and crumpets and things like this, right? You start with a 57 Ranch Wagon. Now, one of the things that bugged Strope right away was the pillars are on different angles. You have this, and it just looked weird to Steve's eye, so he wanted it to look very symmetrical. Seems like a pretty simple thing, right? Let's cut this and tilt it this way and we're good. Yeah, sounds really easy. By the way, it's one of the things I love about Steve Strope, and at the same time it drives me nuts about Steve Strope. He has this ability to design, to bring his ideas to life with the people that he works with, and ultimately create cars that oftentimes look like they coulda, shoulda, probably were that, but they're so far from it. Budget on this, Bob wouldn't give me an exact number because, you know, none of these guys want to admit to what they spend, especially when they start getting north of $1 million. But I did ask Bob, was it close to $1 million? And he just pointed up and smiled, and kind of that was the end of that conversation. They went as far as on this car, I mean, think about the John Causey motor in this thing, the Hilborn stacks, the look that you get in there, not to mention just what does it cost to buy a Causey motor? It's a full modern chassis underneath the car, modern suspension under the car, and feel free to look back on the episode. Tell you the truth, I don't exactly remember what they did suspension and chassis wise, other than that it is a full chassis build under this car. And yet, it simply looks like a really cool station wagon that's maybe stanced properly with a cool set of wheels. Here's a nutty one to consider on this car. Steve wanted the door to be longer and the handle to be different, so they add metal to the door, remove metal from here to make it work, They take a portion of a Thunderbird door and insert it into the, I mean, like, as I try to explain it, it's almost impossible to explain. But as you look at the car and then you compare it to an original one, it's crazy how radically different it is. And the truth is, they should have maybe done it this way from the get-go, but Steve made what should have been done into what we actually get to see here driving. And by the way, this car does actually get driven. Bob did the entire Hot Rod Power Tour in this car. That's a 2,500 mile cruise, something like that. We love to show you show cars, but we're always showing you cars that get driven. Every single car that we show you on the channel, other than the one I mentioned earlier, Brute Force here, which will get driven, every single one of these gets driven. So the final one I'm gonna throw at you is another one from Bob Matranga. And by the way, yeah, Bob spends a lot of money on cars, because I see this comment oftentimes with anything where we show you a very valuable build, is people will say something like, must be nice to have money. Hell yes, absolutely it must be nice. And I'll tell you what, Bob Matranga is a self-made guy. He told me his backstory, and in 1970, he started his company with $10,000 from doing weekend jobs, working, driving himself crazy, to the point where he started his own company and grew it into what it is today. Some people get jealous about that. I say take inspiration from a guy like Bob Matranga, because he's one of the kindest, nicest souls you could ever meet, and he built his company on his own. So anyways, enough about that. Bob has a great love for the Ford Galaxy, but he wasn't planning on building a Galaxy. He bought this Galaxy because it has a 427 single overhead cam motor, affectionately known as the Cammer motor. Very few of these engines were ever produced. It's a highly valuable piece of equipment. This engine alone, I'd venture to guess, has got to be in the range of $100,000. I don't know, let's even say $50,000. Bob buys the white Galaxy with this color interior in it, brings it home with the intent of pulling the engine. Chris Brown, the in-house designer, says, hey Bob, I got an idea. Let's build this Galaxy. What are you thinking? Well, I think we should keep it white, and I think we should keep the interior the same color. And Bob's thinking like, okay, so we just bought this car and you want to build the car to look like it already looks. Bob being Bob goes, cool, I love it, let's build it. And what they ended up doing on this is completely insane. Full modern chassis underneath. Put it on air suspension to get that really bitchin' ride height. The single overhead cam motor in that car is just exceptional. The sound of that is like nothing you've ever heard before. So you've already got a ton of money adding up in here. You've got, again, tens of thousands of dollars into the design work alone before you start building the car. The amount of money, time, energy put into the hood of this car, because they didn't like the look of the original Scoop, but they wanted to retain that look, but make it sexier and sleeker. I literally would bet they have 50,000 bucks into the hood of this car. They did little things on this car as well, like, personally I love it, is there's stickers that look very OEM. It looks like it's the original sticker in the engine bay, on the underside of the trunk lid. But when you take a moment to read them, they brought in a sense of humor and a sense of creativity, but retained that OE look on it, which is just so cool to me. I mean, this is another one of those cars that almost looks like they simply lowered it and gave it a nice set of wheels. You would almost think that. So now the interior on this thing looks almost like the original interior, but it's not. Like, all the materials in here have been changed. It's all been completely redesigned to look exactly like it did. It's completely absurd, and I love it. We didn't lose the car in the build, you know? So oftentimes that happens. Cars get overbuilt to the point where you've lost the original car. You can't even tell what it is. This is still a Galaxy all the way. You can't miss this car. The wrap up I'll throw at you, with all 5 of these cars being built for over $1 million, is no, they're not worth anywhere near that. And the owners of every one of these vehicles know that. But they did it out of passion, and that's what I love about our industry. The custom car world, in my opinion, more than any other aspect of the car world, is driven by passion. You know you're putting money into something that you're predictably not going to get your money back out of, but it's okay. Because at the end of the day, what you end up with is a one-off, completely unique car. So pull up with your buddies in their Lambos and Ferraris at a Cars and Coffee, and you roll in something like any one of these 5 cars we've just shown you. And I promise where the crowd is going is they're coming to one of these cars with a lot of questions about what is this? What am I looking at? How much did it cost? All the questions that we all end up with all the time. That's the wrap up of what you see here and why custom cars are so damn expensive. And I say thanks for hanging and watching what we do, you guys. I really, truly appreciate it. Hope this was a fun one for you. For some of you guys, it's gonna be a learning experience. And for some of you, it might give you a coronary. But I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next episode. All right, man, later.